Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez felt the familiar rumble of the A-10 Thunderbolt beneath her as she completed her third pass over the valley. The twin General Electric turbofan engines hummed with their distinctive whine, a sound that had become as natural to her as breathing during her 18 months flying close air support missions. Below, the rugged terrain of eastern Afghanistan stretched endlessly, a maze of rocky outcroppings and narrow ravines where enemy fighters could disappear like ghosts. The mission briefing had been routine: provide overwatch for a convoy moving through the Korangal Valley, watch for IED emplacements, and be ready to provide immediate fire support if needed. Sarah had flown dozens of similar missions, each one a careful dance between staying alert for threats and managing the monotony of hours spent circling overhead. Her call sign, Phoenix, had been earned during flight training when she had recovered from a seemingly impossible flat spin, bringing her aircraft back from what her instructor had called certain death. The radio crackled in her headset. "Phoenix, this is Groundhog 7. We've got movement approximately 2 clicks north of our position. Request you take a look." Sarah banked the Warthog left, feeling the aircraft respond with the heavy, deliberate movement that characterized the A-10. Unlike the sleek fighters that grabbed all the attention, the Warthog was built for punishment. Its titanium armor could withstand direct hits from small arms fire, and its redundant systems meant it could keep flying even after taking significant damage. Sarah loved the aircraft precisely because it was ugly and practical, designed by engineers who understood that survival mattered more than elegance. Groundhog 7, Phoenix, moving to investigate. She pushed the throttles forward slightly, feeling the acceleration. The heads-up display showed her altitude at 8,000 feet, well within the engagement envelope for most shoulder-fired missiles, but high enough to maintain good visibility of the terrain below. Through her targeting pod, Sarah could see the convoy strung out along the narrow road like a line of ants. Humvees and mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles moved in careful formation, their gunners scanning the hillsides for threats. The landscape looked peaceful from this altitude, but Sarah knew that appearance was deceiving. Enemy fighters had perfected the art of blending into the terrain, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As she approached the coordinates provided by Groundhog 7, Sarah switched her targeting pod to high magnification. The black and white thermal image revealed the heat signatures of several figures moving among the rocks. They appeared to be positioning themselves along a ridgeline that offered an excellent vantage point over the convoy route. One figure carried what looked like a long tube, possibly an RPG launcher. Groundhog 7, Phoenix. I have eyes on multiple personnel in defensive positions along your projected route. Appears to be an ambush setup. Recommend you halt and assess. The response came immediately. Phoenix, Groundhog 7. Roger that. We're stopping movement. Can you engage those targets? Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the transition from observation to action. She had fired the GAU-8 Avenger cannon many times in training and several times in combat, but the responsibility never became routine. Each engagement meant making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between protecting friendly forces and causing unintended casualties. Groundhog 7, Phoenix. I need confirmation that no friendly forces are in the target area. Phoenix, Groundhog 7. Confirm negative friendly forces in that grid square. You are cleared hot. Sarah lined up her approach, configuring the aircraft for a gun run. The GAU-8 cannon was the heart of the A-10, a 7-barrel rotary cannon that could fire 3,900 rounds per minute of 30mm depleted uranium ammunition. Each round was capable of penetrating armored vehicles, and the sound of the cannon firing was unlike anything else in warfare. A deep, ripping roar that enemy forces had learned to fear. She began her descent, adjusting her angle of attack to bring the targeting reticle onto the enemy position. The figures below seemed unaware of her approach, focused on their preparations for ambushing the convoy. Sarah could see them more clearly now through the targeting pod, and she counted at least 6 individuals spread across the ridgeline. At 4,000 feet, she squeezed the trigger. The aircraft shuddered as the massive cannon came to life, sending a stream of depleted uranium rounds toward the target. The sound was deafening even inside the cockpit, a mechanical thunder that seemed to shake the entire aircraft. Through her HUD, Sarah could see the tracers arcing down toward the ridgeline. The effect was immediate, and devastating. Explosions of dirt and rock erupted along the ridgeline as the 30mm rounds impacted. The thermal signatures of the enemy fighters disappeared in clouds of dust and debris. Sarah pulled up from her dive, banking left to assess the damage and prepare for a second pass if necessary. Groundhog 7, Phoenix. Target neutralized. I count no movement in the impact area. Phoenix. Groundhog 7. Outstanding work. Convoy is proceeding with route clearance. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and soberness that always followed successful engagements. She had done her job, protected American forces, and eliminated a threat. But she never forgot that each targeting decision carried enormous weight. The enemy fighters had made their choice to attack coalition forces, but their deaths still represented human lives ended by her actions. She was pulling out of her gun run, climbing back to patrol altitude, when she felt the first indication that something was wrong. A subtle vibration in the flight controls, barely noticeable at first, but growing stronger. The aircraft felt different, less responsive to her inputs. Sarah scanned her instrument panel, looking for warning lights or abnormal readings. Everything appeared normal. Engine temperatures were within limits. Hydraulic pressure was good, and electrical systems were functioning properly. But the vibration was getting worse, and she could feel the aircraft wanting to pull to the right. Phoenix, this is Overlord. The voice of the mission commander crackled through her headset. We're tracking your position. Everything okay up there? Overlord, Phoenix. Experiencing some control issues. Investigating now. Sarah began a systematic check of her systems. The A-10 was famous for its ability to absorb punishment and keep flying. But something was definitely wrong. She tried moving the flight controls through their full range of motion, feeling for binding or unusual resistance. The rudder pedals felt normal, but the stick was requiring more force than usual to maintain level flight. That was when she noticed the fuel gauge. The right external tank was showing a much faster depletion rate than normal. She switched to internal tanks and checked the fuel flow indicators. There was definitely a leak somewhere, and it was getting worse. Overlord. Phoenix. I've got a fuel leak, possibly from battle damage. Requesting vector to nearest suitable airfield. The response came quickly. Phoenix. Overlord. Nearest suitable field is Bagram, bearing 180 degrees. Approximately 120 nautical miles. Are you declaring an emergency? Sarah considered the question. The A-10 had been designed to operate with significant battle damage, but a fuel leak could quickly become critical. If she lost too much fuel, she would not have enough to reach any suitable landing site. The alternative was ejection over hostile territory, something no pilot wanted to contemplate. Overlord, Phoenix. Not declaring emergency at this time, but requesting priority handling for precautionary landing at Bagram. ATI. Phoenix, Overlord. Roger that. Bagram approach control is being notified. Squawk 7,700. And proceed direct. Sarah turned the aircraft toward Bagram Air Base, adjusting her transponder to broadcast the emergency code. The fuel leak seemed to be stabilizing, but she was definitely losing fuel faster than normal. More concerning was the continuing vibration in the controls, and the tendency for the aircraft to want to roll right. As she leveled off at 6,000 feet for the transit to Bagram, Sarah began mentally reviewing emergency procedures. The A-10 was an incredibly robust aircraft, but every pilot knew that any aircraft could be brought down by the right combination of damage and circumstances. The key was staying calm, following procedures, and making good decisions based on available information. The landscape below began to change as she flew south toward Bagram. The mountains gave way to more rolling terrain, dotted with villages and agricultural areas. Sarah could see smoke rising from several locations, reminders that this was still a combat zone where fighting continued daily. 20 minutes into the flight to Bagram, the vibrations suddenly intensified. Sarah felt the aircraft lurch to the right, requiring significant left aileron input to maintain level flight. She glanced at her instruments and saw that hydraulic pressure in the primary system was dropping rapidly. The A-10 had dual hydraulic systems specifically to handle this type of failure. But losing primary hydraulics would make the aircraft much more difficult to control. Sarah immediately began configuring for manual reversion, a mode where the flight controls operated through direct mechanical linkage rather than hydraulic assistance. Overlord Phoenix, I'm showing primary hydraulic failure. Controls are getting very heavy. I may need to consider alternate landing options. Phoenix, Overlord. Copy primary hydraulic failure. Bagram is still your best option. Weather is clear, and emergency equipment is standing by. Sarah wrestled with the heavy controls, feeling the strain in her arms as she fought to keep the aircraft level. Manual reversion in the A-10 was possible but exhausting. The aircraft became sluggish and required significant physical effort to control. She began reducing power to decrease the aerodynamic forces acting on the control surfaces. That was when she noticed the smoke. A thin trail of black smoke was visible from the right engine, barely discernible against the clouded sky but definitely present. Sarah's heart rate increased as she realized that her problems were cascading. Fuel leak, hydraulic failure, and now, possible engine damage. The aircraft was trying to tell her something, and the message was getting louder. Overlord Phoenix, I'm now showing smoke from the right engine, requesting immediate vector to the nearest suitable landing site. There was a pause before the response came. Phoenix. Overlord. Nearest alternative is forward operating base Chapman. Bearing 090 degrees. Approximately 40 nautical miles. The runway is 3,000 feet of packed dirt, but it should be adequate for emergency landing. Sarah knew Chapman. It was a small forward operating base with minimal facilities. But the runway was long enough for an A-10 landing if she could get the aircraft there. The question was whether the aircraft would hold together for another 40 miles of flight. She turned toward Chapman, feeling the aircraft's reluctance to respond to her control inputs. The smoke from the right engine was getting thicker, and she could see occasional flashes of flame in her peripheral vision. The A-10 was tough, but it was clearly in distress. The radio crackled again. Phoenix, this is Viper Lead. Sarah looked up to see two F-16 Fighting Falcons pulling into formation beside her Warthog. The sleek fighters looked like thoroughbreds next to her wounded workhorse, their gray paint schemes marking them as part of the Theater Air Superiority mission. Viper Lead. Phoenix. Thanks for the company. Phoenix. Viper Lead. We were in the area and heard you might need some assistance. We can provide escort and relay communications if needed. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude for the fighter pilot's presence. Having other aircraft nearby provided both practical assistance and psychological support. If she had to eject, the F-16 seconds could mark her location and coordinate search and rescue efforts. Viper Lead, Phoenix. Appreciate the escort. I'm dealing with multiple system failures and trying to make it to Chapman. Phoenix, Viper Lead. Roger that. We'll stick with you all the way. Your aircraft looks like it's taken some hits. Sarah glanced at her right wing, trying to see what the F-16 pilot was observing. The smoke trail was more obvious now, and she could see what appeared to be small holes in the wing surface. Battle damage from ground fire during her gun run, most likely. Small arms rounds that had found their mark despite the A-10's armor. The irony was not lost on her. The A-10 had been designed to survive exactly this type of damage and continue flying, but every aircraft had its limits. And Sarah was beginning to suspect that her Warthog was approaching those limits rapidly. Forward operating base Chapman appeared on the horizon as a small collection of buildings and vehicles surrounded by defensive barriers. The runway was exactly as described, a strip of packed dirt that looked tiny from her current altitude. Sarah had landed on rough fields before during training, but never with a damaged aircraft and failing systems. Chapman Tower, Phoenix. Declaring emergency. Inbound for landing with battle damage and multiple system failures. Phoenix, Chapman Tower. Runway is clear, winds calm. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Report when you have the field in sight. Chapman Tower, Phoenix. Field in sight, beginning approach. Sarah began configuring the aircraft for landing, but immediately encountered problems. The landing gear system operated on hydraulic pressure, and with primary hydraulics failed, she had to use the emergency gear extension system. She pulled the manual gear extension handle and felt the aircraft shudder as the landing gear deployed. Only the main gear extended properly. The nose gear remained retracted despite her efforts to extend it manually. Sarah realized she was facing a gear-up landing on the nose wheel, a dangerous situation that could result in the aircraft digging into the dirt and flipping over. Chapman Tower, Phoenix. I have main gear down and locked, but nose gear will not extend. Preparing for gear-up landing. Phoenix, Chapman Tower. Roger, gear-up landing. Crash rescue is standing by. Sarah lined up on final approach, trying to judge her descent rate with the heavy, unresponsive controls. The A-10 wanted to sink faster than normal, probably due to the battle damage affecting its aerodynamics. She added power to maintain her approach speed, but the right engine was clearly not producing normal thrust. The ground rushed up toward her as she crossed the runway threshold. Sarah held the nose up as long as possible, trying to touch down on the main gear first and keep the nose off the ground as long as possible. The aircraft hit the packed dirt with a jarring impact that threw her forward against her harness. For a moment, the A-10 rolled normally on its main gear. Then the nose began to drop as the aircraft slowed. Sarah braced herself for the impact of the nose hitting the runway. The aircraft scraped along the dirt in a shower of sparks and dust, gradually slowing as friction did the work that normal brakes would have accomplished. Sarah fought to keep the aircraft straight using differential engine thrust and rudder input. But the nose-down attitude made control difficult. Finally, the A-10 came to rest in a cloud of dust about 2/3 of the way down the runway. Sarah quickly shut down both engines and began securing the aircraft systems. Around her, she could hear the approaching sirens of crash rescue vehicles. As the dust settled and rescue personnel surrounded the aircraft, Sarah realized that her ordeal was just beginning. She was on the ground safely, but she was also stranded at a remote forward operating base with a severely damaged aircraft. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered why the F-16 pilots had gone completely silent after she had given them her tail number during the approach. David Chen arrived at Chapman the next morning in a civilian contractor flight that seemed unusual for such a remote location. Sarah met him in a small conference room that had been arranged for their consultation, away from the main operations center where the ongoing investigation continued. Chen was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in his early 30s, with sharp eyes and a serious demeanor that suggested extensive experience despite his age. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to handling complex legal situations. Captain Martinez, before we begin, I need to tell you something that's going to sound incredible, Chen said, opening his briefcase and removing several documents. Your aircraft was not damaged by ground fire during your mission yesterday. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. That's impossible. I felt the impacts during my gun run. Master Sergeant Rodriguez found multiple bullet holes in the fuselage and wings. Those holes were not made by small arms fire, Chen replied, sliding a technical analysis across the table. According to preliminary forensic examination, the damage patterns are consistent with directed energy weapons, specifically experimental laser systems. The document contained detailed photographs of Sarah's Warthog, showing the damage from multiple angles. Unlike the ragged holes that bullets would create, these punctures were perfectly round with smooth edges and signs of intense heat damage around the perimeters. Laser weapons? That's science fiction. The enemy doesn't have that kind of technology. The enemy didn't shoot down your aircraft, Chen said quietly. The damage came from above and behind, consistent with air-to-air engagement. Someone wanted your aircraft disabled, but not destroyed. They needed you to survive. Sarah felt the room spinning as the implications sank in. Are you saying that American aircraft shot me down? That's insane. I'm saying that your aircraft was deliberately disabled using experimental weapon systems that are not supposed to exist. The question is why. Chen opened another folder and removed a series of satellite images. These are the actual images of your target area, taken from different satellites at the time of your engagement. Look at them carefully. The images showed the same ridgeline where Sarah had conducted her gun run, but these photographs revealed details that her targeting pod had not displayed. There were indeed structures in the area, but they appeared to be military installations rather than civilian dwellings. The thermal signatures that she had interpreted as enemy fighters were actually equipment and vehicles positioned around what looked like a sophisticated communications facility. "This is what you actually attacked," Chen explained. "A covert intelligence gathering station operated by a third-party nation. The installation was monitoring coalition communications and providing targeting information to enemy forces throughout the region." Sarah studied the images more carefully. "Why didn't I see this through my targeting pod? The image quality should have been good enough to identify structures of this size. Because your targeting pod was being fed false imagery," Chen said. "Someone with access to very sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities was manipulating what you saw in real time. They wanted that installation destroyed, but they needed it to appear to be a legitimate military target to avoid international complications." The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the picture they formed was more disturbing than Sarah had imagined. "So I was used as an unwitting weapon in a covert operation?" "Yes. And when the operation was complete, you were supposed to be eliminated to prevent you from asking inconvenient questions. The aircraft that escorted you to Chapman were not there to help you. They were there to finish the job." Sarah remembered the sudden silence of the F-16 pilots when she had given her tail number during the approach to Chapman. "Why didn't they complete their mission?" "Because your tail number triggered automated alerts in multiple intelligence databases. When you transmitted it during your emergency approach, several agencies immediately realized that an unauthorized covert operation was in progress. The F-16 pilots received orders to abort their mission and return to base." Chen pulled out another document. This one, bearing classification markings that Sarah recognized as being well above her security clearance level. "The installation you destroyed was operated by a nation that is technically an ally, but which has been providing intelligence support to our enemies. Officially, we cannot acknowledge that the attack took place. Unofficially, eliminating that facility saved American lives. But what about the civilian casualties? The investigation team told me that I had killed innocent people." "There were no civilian casualties," Chen said firmly. "That story was created to provide cover for the real nature of the target. The intelligence officers who briefed you yesterday were not aware of the classified aspects of this operation." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that she had not killed innocent people, but anger at being manipulated and nearly murdered to cover up a covert operation. "Who authorized this operation? And who decided that I was expendable?" "That's where things get complicated," Chen admitted. "The operation was authorized by a joint task force that includes elements from several agencies. But the decision to eliminate you appears to have been made without proper authorization. Someone exceeded their authority and nearly committed murder to protect their operation." The sound of helicopters approaching interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Sarah could see several military helicopters landing near the operations center, disgorging personnel in civilian clothes who moved with obvious authority. "The investigation team has arrived," Chen observed. "These are the people who will determine your official fate. But they're also the people who authorized the original operation." Sarah realized that she was caught in a situation where the people investigating her were also the people responsible for the covert operation that had led to her predicament. "What are my options?" "You have several choices. None of them perfect," Chen replied. "You can cooperate fully with the investigation and hope that they decide to classify the entire incident. You can demand a public court-martial and expose the covert operation. Or you can accept reassignment to a classified program where your knowledge can be contained. What would you recommend?" "That depends on what you want to accomplish. If you want to continue your military career without complications, accept the classified reassignment. If you want justice for what was done to you, demand the public court-martial. If you want to protect other pilots from similar manipulation, cooperate but insist on changes to prevent future unauthorized operations." Sarah considered her options as she watched the investigation team establishing their temporary headquarters in the operations center. Each choice carried significant risks and uncertain outcomes. Her phone rang, showing a number she recognized as belonging to the F-16 pilot who had escorted her to Chapman. "Captain Martinez, this is Major Reynolds, Viper Led. I need to speak with you immediately. What about, Major? About what really happened yesterday. About why my wingman and I were ordered to escort you to Chapman, and about the additional orders we received after you landed. Sarah looked at Chen, who nodded encouragingly. Where do you want to meet? There's a maintenance hangar on the south side of the field. Can you get there without being seen by the investigation team? I think so. Give me 10 minutes. Chen gathered his documents as Sarah prepared to leave. Captain, whatever Major Reynolds tells you, remember that you now have information that makes you valuable to several different factions. Use that leverage carefully. The maintenance hangar was located away from the main flight line, used for repairs on vehicles and equipment, rather than aircraft. Sarah found Major Reynolds waiting beside a damaged Humvee, his flight suit dirty and his expression grim. Captain Martinez, what I'm about to tell you could end my career. But you deserve to know the truth, Reynolds began. My wingman and I were briefed yesterday morning for what we were told was a routine escort mission. We were told to rendezvous with a battle-damaged A-10 and provide escort to the nearest suitable airfield. That matches what happened, Sarah said. But after you landed, we received additional orders through a classified communication channel. We were told to conduct a training exercise involving simulated air-to-air combat with your aircraft after you had vacated the runway. Sarah felt cold understanding wash over her. You were ordered to destroy my aircraft with me still in it? The orders were phrased as a training exercise, but the target coordinates they provided would have resulted in your death. My wingman questioned the orders, and that's when we learned that the mission had been compromised. We were told to return to base immediately and report for debriefing. Reynolds pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a photograph of a communication screen. This is the message we received, canceling the attack. Look at the authorization codes. The phone. Sarah studied the image. The cancellation order had come from the highest levels of the Pentagon, with authorization codes that indicated direct involvement from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Major, are you willing to testify about what you were ordered to do? That's why I'm talking to you. My wingman and I have been ordered to report for reassignment to classified programs, effective immediately. We're being transferred out of theater today. But before we leave, we wanted you to know that we never would have carried out those orders, even if they hadn't been canceled. Reynolds handed Sarah a sealed envelope. This contains copies of our mission orders and communication logs. If anything happens to my wingman and me, make sure this information reaches the right people. As Major Reynolds left to rejoin his wingman for their departure, Sarah realized that she possessed evidence of an attempted murder conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the military command structure. The question was what to do with that evidence. She returned to the conference room where Chen was waiting. After reading the contents of Reynolds' envelope, the attorney sat quietly for several minutes before speaking. Captain, you now have evidence of multiple federal crimes, including attempted murder, conspiracy, and violation of rules of engagement. You also have leverage that extends to the highest levels of government. What do you recommend? I recommend that we approach the investigation team with a proposal. You'll cooperate fully with their inquiry in exchange for several conditions. First, that the real nature of the target be acknowledged in classified records. Second, that Major Reynolds and his wingman be protected from retaliation. And third, that procedures be implemented to prevent similar unauthorized operations. When the investigation team called Sarah for her interview later that afternoon, she was prepared. The team consisted of 3 senior officers and 2 civilians who introduced themselves only as government representatives. Captain Martinez, we understand that you've retained legal counsel. The senior investigator, a general whose name tag read Harrison, began. That's your right. But we hope we can resolve this matter through cooperation rather than confrontation. General, I'm prepared to cooperate fully, Sarah replied. But I have information that changes the nature of this investigation significantly. She placed Reynolds' envelope on the table and summarized what she had learned about the covert operation, the manipulation of her targeting systems, and the attempted murder plot. The reactions of the investigation team members revealed that some were hearing this information for the first time. Captain, these are very serious allegations. General Harrison said after reviewing the documents. If proven, they indicate criminal activity at the highest levels. General, I'm not interested in destroying careers or exposing classified operations unnecessarily, Sarah replied. I just want the truth acknowledged and safeguards put in place to protect other pilots. The negotiation that followed took several hours, but eventually reached an agreement that satisfied all parties. The covert operation would be acknowledged in classified records. The pilots who had protected Sarah would be transferred to prestigious assignments rather than punitive ones, and new oversight procedures would be implemented for joint intelligence operations. Sarah's official record would show that she had successfully completed a classified mission with distinction, resulting in her promotion to major and assignment to an elite test pilot program. The damaged Warthog would be repaired and returned to service, bearing scars that told a story that would never be officially acknowledged. As Sarah prepared to leave Chapman 3 days later, she took one last look at her aircraft. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had worked around the clock to repair the damage, and the A-10 looked almost new except for patches that covered the laser damage. She'll fly again, Captain, Rodriguez said, joining Sarah beside the aircraft. Tough old bird, just like her pilot. Sarah smiled and patted the side of the fuselage. Take care of her, Sergeant. And remember, sometimes the most important missions are the ones that never make it into the official records. As she boarded the transport aircraft that would take her back to Bagram and eventually to her new assignment, Sarah reflected on the events of the past few days. She had nearly been killed by friendly fire, almost court-martialed for war crimes, and ultimately emerged as a key figure in exposing corruption at the highest levels of government. The F-16 pilots who had gone silent when she transmitted her tail number had done so because they recognized that she represented something more important than any single mission or operation. She represented the principle that American military personnel should never be treated as expendable assets in unauthorized covert operations. Her tail number, which had nearly gotten her killed, had ultimately saved her life and exposed a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of government. The database alert that her transmission had triggered ensured that her story would be remembered, even if it could never be officially told. As the transport aircraft climbed away from Chapman, Sarah could see her Warthog being prepared for its return to active duty. Somewhere in the mountains below, the smoking ruins of the covert installation she had destroyed served as evidence that even in the murky world of intelligence operations, there were still lines that should not be crossed. The war would continue, and pilots would still face life and death decisions in the cockpits of their aircraft. But because of what had happened to Sarah Phoenix Martinez, those pilots would have better protection against those who would manipulate them for unauthorized purposes. Her call sign had proven prophetic. Like the mythical phoenix, she had risen from the ashes of betrayal and conspiracy, stronger and wiser than before, and her story, though never officially acknowledged, would serve as a reminder that even in the darkest corners of covert operations, individual courage and integrity could still prevail.